Hello. Ooh, camera looks a little tilted. Hi. Yeah, books. Happy Wednesday. Happy Wednesday, June 22nd. It's the day after the summer solstice. That's right. If you weren't paying attention, summer solstice was yesterday. A little more this way. Look at that. Look at that blank wall behind me there. No posters. No fan art. Just a blank sort of sandstone gray wall. Weird. Hi, Books, Brews, and Booze. How you doing? We missed you on Friday. It's good to see ya. What's new? What have you been up to? Is my audio coming through? Doodle 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 doo. It looks like it is. Oh, what is this? Some kind of fluff? Some kind of cotton or Binabic fluff? Something up in there. It's the difficulty with having all this hair, especially if I don't tie it back. Ooh! Sharkies! Ooh, why ooh? Is it because I was kind of rhyming ooh sounds? Empty room, yeah. Yeah, look at that wall. Look at that shelf. The shelves there. Something's caught under my chair. Just a sec. Get this off of here. Toss. Yeah, look at all this. Look at this space. Got the stack of books there, and we got an empty shelf and an empty wall. Stuff's disappearing. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I guess that's true, because normally when you come into Twitch, the chat is just blank. You can't see the previous chat. So now with it showing up on the screen, you can see at least a few things that were said before you arrived. Yeah, it's funny that just in order to get our house ready for showings, we're going to be rearranging some of our furniture too. Because right now we've got our furniture arranged in a way that we like it, but we're also aware that not everybody else might necessarily like it there, or it may not actually look, the most aesthetically pleasing to everybody. So we're going to rearrange some things to sort of hopefully look just more generically nice. Move our couch from where it is over against a different wall so that the back door is more accessible. Arranging it for the lowest common denominator. Let's say not the lowest. I guess lowest. That I know what that means, but it sounds really negative, doesn't it? I feel like that phrase is used in a negative context a lot of the time. So let's say instead, just for, the average person, which isn't a bad thing to be the average person, but just, we don't know who's going to be coming and looking through the place, and so we will arrange it so that whoever might come through, it will hopefully look acceptable too. I'm rhyming a bit today for some reason. Turn down the temperature a little bit because I am going to get warm sitting here. In fairness, when you use it, it's usually in a negative context too. Yeah. Yeah, I don't mean to be taking shots at anyone that might want to buy our house, but just we don't know what their tastes might be, so we'll make the house look as neutral as possible. You've got some empty areas that you need to spread your furniture into, some space to grow into. Yeah, yeah, we've got the space over beside me here because I've got, the computer set up here, and then we have a VR headset. And so the ideal setup for having a VR headset is to have an open space to play in. There are a lot of games that you can play sitting in a chair with just sort of the space around you, but some of the more entertaining things are nicer if you can be up and about. Not everything. Some stuff's actually really good seated. For instance, if the game involves you being, say, seated in the control, like in the cockpit of a spaceship or a giant mech or something like that, then it's actually kind of nice to be seated while you're playing because you feel like you're actually sitting there. You can be flying through space and look around and see the stars and planets around you. It's really cool. Especially if you've got a like a stick and throttle setup. HOTAS, HOTAS, hands on throttle and stick. That can be really cool. There have been some games that have been, once you get it going and you get the feel of it, because the tricky thing is that you can't, if you're not familiar with where all the buttons are on your control stick and everything, you can't look down and see them because you've got your headset on. So you look down and you see your virtual setup, right? And sadly, my joystick and throttle setup does not look identical to the one inside the cockpit of an X-Wing. So if I look down in game, I can see hands on stick and things, but they're not accurate. So if I'm like, oh, what button do I need to press here? Because there's a few buttons on the setup. That can be tricky. So it takes some familiarizing with those. But then there's another game that I was playing quite a bit of a while back. I haven't played it for a little while, but I had a group of people I was playing with because it's mainly a multiplayer game. Called Iron something, I think. Let me take a look at my game library. Pretty sure it's... no, that's not it. I'm just forgetting what it's actually called. Let's take a look through my... Oops. It's not it. It's not it. Vox Machina. Not even close. No iron in the name at all. It's called Vox Machina. But it's... you're piloting a mech. But the neat thing about that one is you just use your motion control like your normal. For what I've got is, this is one of the motion controllers, so it sticks on your hand like this, and it can tell when you close your hand on it, right? Like it can tell where your fingers are. And then if you squeeze, that's like grabbing something, and so you've got one of these on each hand. And then there are buttons on it that you use for some of the controls, but in Vox Machina, you're sitting in the cockpit of this giant sort of semi-steampunkish mech. Not exactly steampunk, but it's kind of clunky. But you've got in front of you your controls, right? You've got like a lever, and you've got a control stick here, and you've got a knob you've got to pull, and things like that. And so what you actually do while you're playing the game is you reach out and you manually move the virtual controls around in order to control the mech, right? You move this lever from side to side in order to rotate, and you move this front and back to go forward. And if you need to jump, you pull on this thing, and you can kind of adjust the way you're pulling it to adjust the thrust, and things like that. And then you just basically use the buttons on your control stick for firing your weapons. So that one's really kind of fun in a, once you're in the thick of it, especially if you're not familiar with the controls yet, you can find yourself kind of scrambling going, oh, okay, I need to grab this and pull that, and like while you're still trying to keep track of your opponents and things. So it's sort of fun in the like, what do I do? What do I pull? What do I press? So that game's entertaining in that way. I like the way that they did the controls. That one's one where I feel like it would actually be less fun to be using like a joystick setup. Reminds Sharkies when they were learning to drive standard cars. When you were driving did not have the gear pattern on the gear shift knob, so you had to really think hard. Oh boy. That's oof. I learned to drive standard, but I was never good at it. I didn't learn well. And I was quite happy to switch to automatic. Farm was talking about the floor plan we'd like to have on the new house. Farmers had 3 days of trying to learn how to drive standard before you gave up and went for automatic. Oh, Sharkies prefer standard. Oh, well. Ooh la la. Our car couldn't be standard if we wanted it to because it's electric, so it doesn't have all those gears and shifts and things to do. It just, electricity goes to wheels, turn, go. It's funny how it feels both more futuristic because it's an electric car, like that's the dream, but it also feels less, I don't know, more simplistic at the same time. Step on the accelerator, go. Standard car is getting harder to find unless you want a sports car, so you're a little resigned to the idea that your next car is going to have to be automatic or electric. To be fair, I find the electric really fun to drive because, I don't know, it's like driving an RC car. And it accelerates very quickly because partly I think because it's more streamlined, right? There's less moving parts and things like that. And also because the way it's got 2 driving modes. You've got your typical, like, the way that a combustion car drives, you take your foot off the accelerator and it'll still kind of coast forward. And then you have to step on the brakes to stop. But we usually drive on this mode where essentially if you take your foot off the accelerator, it automatically engages the regenerative braking. So the moment you take your foot off, it starts to slow down on its own. And once you get used to that, which doesn't take too long, then basically you just judge how long until you need to stop in most cases, and you don't touch the brakes. I've had entire trips where I just don't actually put my foot on the brakes at all. And then if you need to stop more abruptly because someone in front of you slams on the brakes or whatever, then you step on the brakes. But that also means that you can just kind of keep your foot on the accelerator, right? You just take the pressure off, and then once the light turns green, you're already there. There's no moving your foot around sort of thing. So you can really take off from green from a stop to a start. Yep, all the power goes directly to spinning the wheels. Yeah, there's no combustion, just electricity makes go. And yeah, like Farmos is saying, there's not a lot to go wrong. We really haven't. We've had the car since 2018. And, we swap out the wheels for summer and winter. And but there's no oil changes, there's no fuel ups. We pretty much just put in windshield wiper fluid occasionally, and you know, take it to the to get any servicing that needs done in terms of just routine maintenance. But there's not even very much of that. We did get the battery replaced on it because they did a recall, so they replaced it for free, which was great because it's like, okay, basically like having a brand new engine. Edgar Perez is back. Hey, and you finished Eyes of the Dragon, right, by Stephen King. So, yeah, I'm curious. How did it feel? As you say, it was good. Did it have any big twists to the storytelling format? Or was it just sort of a typical fantasy novel? Because I'm curious about that. Because, you know, Stephen King, I kind of expect a twist. Which maybe if it didn't have any, that would be even more twisty. Because it's not what I expected. Sharky's kids have an RC Batman monster truck that has a lot more zip than you expected, much faster than the previous truck. That's fun. That's always fun to have an RC car that can really go. It's always a little sad when they just sort of, you know, it's like, okay, it moves around, but it's not exciting. You want it to go. Or to do something funny. Like I had a tumbler one that could flip over and keep going when I was a kid. So you could like drive it at a wall and it would flip over and then you could keep driving. That was fun. I had a few RC cars growing up, but I didn't play with them very often. It was fun to have them. Like I did play with them occasionally, but it felt like almost a special occasion bringing them out to play with for some reason. I don't know why. I think it was all the like recharging of batteries and things like that, and the battery technology when I was a kid, you know, was less reliable. So, I feel like they tended to die pretty easily. Mr. Sharky had an RC police car in the 90s. That one was loud, not including the siren. Oh boy. Was it battery powered? A friend of mine had like a gas powered RC car, and that thing was fast. Like that felt like, you know, someone who was actually into the hobby style RC car, and you know, it was probably more expensive than I would have been able to play with as a kid. You had to take it out to a big sort of lot in order to really have it move around. But that thing was a little noisy as well because, you know, it was gas powered. Combustion. Took a legion of batteries. Died within a few years. Yeah, it's interesting. These days I feel like more and more things either have built-in or rechargeable batteries or whatever. There's not a lot that I use that just uses like AA's or AAA's or whatever anymore. The occasional device. But it tends to mostly be like outdoorsy gear that uses replaceable batteries. You know, like an electric air pump or a flashlight or something like that. Some of the cars I had I think most of the cars I had when I was a kid, like the RC cars, would use like a big brick rechargeable battery that was specific to that car. Yeah. So, Books, Brews, and Booze. I don't know if you're still lurking in the background, probably feeding the kitties, feeding Toothless. But we read chapter 1 on Friday, which covered pages 11 to 20. Sharkies, does your copy line up for the page count? Are you currently on page, like, does chapter 2 start on page 21 for you? Kids 2 trucks have USB rechargeable, but the controllers run on AAA. Oh, okay. Sort of a mix. I would expect that the controllers would probably last a fair amount of time on some batteries, right? There's not a lot of high drain I would expect in there, and especially if you maybe take the batteries out when you're not using it, then they're not, idly draining. Not that I'm very good at doing that kind of thing. That's more of a... Your chapter 2 starts on 21. Okay, so the maps are different, but the page count's the same. Yeah, so chapter 1, in part 1, Maragor, was from Her Imperial Highness Princess Senedra's point of view. Jewel of the House of Borun and the loveliest flower of the Tolnedran Empire. I like how those are all listed more like titles than, compliments. Yeah, I was saying that I think this is only maybe the second or third chapter out of all of the books so far that of the Belgaria that has not been from Garion's point of view. And the other one or two, probably only one other one, was, I think, also from Princess Sinedra's point of view. So it's sort of an interesting thing, like that, we've never had a chapter from Belgarath or Polgara's point of view, or from Silk, or Barak, or Dernick. They've all been Garion. And, not counting the prologues, which are just sort of a historical excerpt, or religious, or both, technically. So it's interesting the choice of switching to suddenly having these chapters from Sinedra's point of view. And in this case, starting this book with it, I think was an interesting way to handle like sort of a kind of recap of like the characters that are in the party, right? That are traveling together. Because you've got Princess Sinedra, who's relatively new to the group, kind of recounting to herself, who is this, who is that, what do I think of them, as kind of an outsider. Yeah. Plus it's kind of just funny seeing her point of view, the perspective of the somewhat spoiled princess. I say somewhat, but probably very is more accurate. Yeah, so they were on Captain Greldick's ship, traveling on a river from Nyssa, I believe. And I believe they were headed... Did they say where they were headed? They're headed in the long term. Their destination is the Vale of Aldur. Aldur being a god. One of the one that created the Orb of Aldur and didn't really take a people when all of the other gods did, other than Ul, as we heard about Ul, but eventually sort of adopted a select handful of disciples rather than a whole people. Yeah, let's see what they say about being on Greldick's ship. If I can find that. They rolled upstream from the ash-choked city of this store. Well, let's see if I can see on the map. Let's see, Tolnedra, Nyssa is there. River of the Serpents, Sisttor. Sistor is on my map fairly far west. So I imagine that they are, yeah, they're probably heading northeast, somewhere in that direction, but I guess it doesn't specifically say that I can see here. So yeah, we only read one chapter on Friday. So why don't I get started on chapter 2? What does everyone think? Shall I? I think I shall. Alright, Magician's Gambit, chapter 2, page 21. Looks like this one is probably from Sinedra's point of view as well. 2 in a row. The trip up the rapids of the River of the Serpent took the better part of a week. Although it was still swelteringly hot, they had all by now grown at least partially accustomed to the climate. Princess Sinedra spent most of her time sitting on deck with Polgara, pointedly ignoring Geryon. She did, however, glance frequently his way to see if she could detect any signs of suffering. Ignoring while paying a lot of attention to. That makes sense, right? Ignoring, but you gotta make sure that he knows that he's being ignored. Since her life was entirely in the hands of these people, Sinedra felt keenly the necessity for winning them over. Belgarath would be no problem. A few winsome little girl smiles, a bit of eyelash fluttering, and a spontaneous-seeming kiss or two would wrap him neatly around one of her fingers. That particular campaign could be conducted at any time she felt it convenient. But Polgara was a different matter. For one thing, Sinedra was awed by the lady's spectacular beauty. Polgara was flawless. Even the white lock in the midnight of her hair was not so much a defect as it was a sort of accent, a personal trademark. Most disconcerting to the princess were Polgara's eyes. Depending on her mood, they ranged in color from gray to a deep, deep blue, and they saw through everything. No dissimulation was possible in the face of that calm, steady gaze. Each time the princess looked into those eyes, she seemed to hear the clink of chains. She definitely had to get on Polgara's good side. Sharky says, I won't pay attention to Geryon. Nope, not Geryon. I'm not even looking at Geryon. Geryon. Chewing on hair. Alright, the first time the princess is actually speaking in this book so far. Let's see. Lady Polgara, the princess said one morning as they sat together on deck, while the steaming gray-green jungle slid by on either bank and the sweating sailors labored at their oars. Yes, dear? Polgara looked up from the button she was sewing on one of Geryon's tunics. She wore a pale blue dress, open at the throat in the heat, back to blue. What is sorcery? I was always told that such things didn't exist. It seemed like a good place to start the discussion. Polgara smiled at her. Tolnedran education tends to be a bit one-sided. Is it a trick of some kind? Sinedra persisted. I mean, is it like showing people something with one hand while you're taking something away with the other? She toyed with the laces on her sandals. No, dear, it's nothing like that. It's nothing at all like that. Exactly how much can one do with it? We've never explored that particular boundary, Polgara replied, her needle still busy. When something has to be done, we do it. We don't bother worrying about whether we can or not. Different people are better at different things, though. It's somewhat on the order of some men being better at carpentry, while others specialize in stonemasonry. Garion's a sorcerer, isn't he? How much can he do? Now, why had she asked that? I was wondering where this was leading, Polgara said, giving the tiny girl a penetrating look. Sinedra blushed slightly. Don't chew on your hair, dear. Yup. Don't chew on your hair, dear, Polgara told her. You'll split the ends. Shuki say, there it is. I like how it doesn't even say Sinedra was chewing on her hair. It's just Polgara telling her to stop. Sinedra quickly removed the curl from between her teeth. We're not sure what Garion can do yet, Polgara continued. It's probably much too early to tell. He seems to have talent. He certainly makes enough noise whenever he does something, and that's a fair indication of his potential. There it is. Oh, right on cue. Hank. He makes enough noise. Like someone that blows their nose in a really loud fashion. That means they've got potential. He'll probably be a very powerful sorcerer then. A faint smile touched Polgara's lips. Probably so, she replied, always assuming that he learns to control himself. Well, Sinedra declared, we'll just have to teach him how to control himself then, won't we? Polgara looked at her for a moment, and then she began to laugh. Sinedra felt a bit sheepish, but she also laughed. Garion, who was standing not far away, turned to look at them. What's so funny? He asked. Nothing you'd understand, dear, Polgara told him. He looked offended and moved away, his back stiff and his face set. Sinedra and Polgara laughed again. When Captain Greldick's ship finally reached the point where rocks and swiftly tumbling water made it impossible to go any farther, they moored her to a large tree on the north bank, and the party prepared to go ashore. Barak stood sweating in his mail shirt beside his friend Greldick, watching Hetar oversee the unloading of the horses.
If you happen to see my wife, give her my greetings,
the red-bearded man said. Greldick nodded.
I'll probably be near Trelheim sometime during the coming winter. I don't know that you need to tell her that I know about her pregnancy. She'll probably want to surprise me with my son when I get home. I wouldn't want to spoil that for her.
Greldick looked a little surprised.
I thought you enjoyed spoiling things for her, Barak. Maybe it's time that Merrill and I made peace with each other. This little war of ours was amusing when we were younger, but it might not be a bad idea to put it aside now, for the sake of the children, if nothing else.
Really, Barak? It's very mature of you. Belgarath came up on deck and joined the two bearded Cherriks.
Go to Val Elorn,
he told Captain Greldick.
Tell Anheg where we are and what we're doing. Have him get word to the others. Tell them that I absolutely forbid their going to war with the Angarax just now. Kruchik has the orb at Rak Kthol, and if there's a war, Tor Urgas will seal the borders of Kthol Murgos. Things are going to be difficult enough for us without that to contend with. I'll tell him, Greldick replied doubtfully. I don't think he'll like it much, though. He doesn't have to like it, Belgarath said bluntly. He just has to do it.
Sinedra, standing not far away, felt a little startled when she heard the shabby-looking old man issuing his peremptory commands. How could he speak so to sovereign kings? And what if Garion, as a sorcerer, should someday have a similar authority? Everything comes back to Garion. She turned and gazed at the young man who was helping Dernick the smith calm an excited horse. He didn't look authoritative. She pursed her lips. A robe of some kind might help, she thought, and maybe some sort of book of magic in his hands. And perhaps just the hint of a beard. She narrowed her eyes, imagining him so robed, booked, and bearded. Wow. Without meaning to... Oh, sorry, I skipped ahead. Garion, obviously feeling her eyes on him, looked quickly in her direction, his expression questioning. He was so ordinary. The image of this plain, unassuming boy in the finery she had concocted for him in her mind was suddenly ludicrous. Without meaning to, she laughed. Garion flushed and stiffly turned his back on her. Poor Garion. It's not fun getting laughed at. Since the rapids of the River of the Serpent effectively blocked all further navigation upriver, the trail leading up into the hills was quite broad, indicating that most travelers struck out overland at that point. As they rode up out of the valley in the mid-morning sunlight, they passed rather quickly out of the tangled jungle growth lining the river, and moved into a hardwood forest that was much more to Sinedra's liking. Escaping the jungle at last. At the crest of the first rise, they even encountered a breeze that seemed to brush away the sweltering heat and stink of Nyssa's festering swamps. Sinedra's spirits lifted immediately. She considered the company of Prince Keldar, but he was dozing in his saddle, and Sinedra was just a bit afraid of the sharp-nosed Drasnian. She recognized immediately that the cynical, wise little man could probably read her like a book, and she didn't really care for that idea. Instead, she rode forward along the column to ride with Baron Mandorallen, who led the way, as was his custom. Her move was prompted in part by the desire to get as far away from the steaming river as possible, but there was more to it than that. It occurred to her that this might be an excellent opportunity to question this Arendish nobleman about a matter that interested her. A matter that interests Princess Sinedra. What could it be? Place your bets.
Your Highness,
the armored knight said respectfully, as she pulled her horse in beside his huge charger.
Dost think it prudent to place thyself in the vanguard thus?
Who would be so foolish as to attack the bravest knight in the world? She asked with artful innocence. Sharkies are saying how to not look at Garion. Yes, let's go ask the mightiest knight in the land. How do I not look at this very ordinary boy?
Step 1. Take up thine blade.
The Baron's expression grew melancholy, and he sighed. "And why so great a sigh, Sir Knight?" she bantered.
"It is of no moment, your Highness," he replied.
They rode along in silence through the dappled shade, where insects hummed and darted, and small scurrying things skittered and rustled in the bushes at the side of the trail. Sharky say, well, he's the best at everything, so it follows that he's the best at not looking at Garion. It also follows that he's the best at looking at Garion! Let's be fair, he's not the best at everything. He's just the best at knightly pursuits. I don't know if looking at or not looking at Garion would be considered knightly pursuits. But for example, I don't think he's the best at stealth, or mercantilism, or carpentry. He's just the mightiest knight. They rode along... Oh, I said I read that already. "Tell me," the princess said finally, "have you known Belgarath for long?"
"All my life, your Highness."
"Is he highly regarded in Erendia?"
"Highly regarded? Holy Belgarath is the paramount man in the world. Surely thou knowest that, princess."
"I'm Tolnedran, Baron Mandorallen," she pointed out. "Our familiarity with sorcerers is limited. Would an errand describe Belgarath as a man of noble birth?"
Mandorallen laughed. "Your Highness, holy Belgarath's birth is so far lost in the dim reaches of antiquity that thy question has no meaning."
Has no meaning, not hath? He dropped a hath. Farmos pointing out he does have experience with keeping unwanted feelings for another person in check. Good point. Sharky say he's older than kingdoms. Yeah. Literally true. He was around before Erendia existed. Actually, that's tough to say. Definitely before Erendia existed in its current form, and definitely before, like, Cherek and Algaria and Riva, or the Isle of Winds. Not Riva. Before those all existed. But Erendia isn't one of those split kingdoms. Erendia... I don't know the name of the god that the Arends follow. I'm sure it's been mentioned, but probably only like once. Not all of the gods get mentioned equally. We hear a lot about Torak, Ul, Aldor, a little bit about Belar, which is the god of the Alorns, Cherek and Algaria and all that. Nyissa, right? We hear about those 5. But I feel like there's another, like, 3 or so that don't get mentioned as often. 2 or 3, something like that, right? Yeah. All right, so. And we've met Nyssa. He's a cool dude. Yeah, he seemed kind of sad and tired. Oh, and of course Mara. Mara's one we have heard of, at least. I mentioned Ul. Ul was one of the 5 I counted. Anyways, thy question has no meaning. Sinedra frowned. She did not particularly like being laughed at. Is he or is he not a nobleman? She pressed.
He is Belgarath, Mandorallen replied, as if that explained everything. There are hundreds of barons, earls by the score, and lords without number.
Those first 2 lines felt like he was going to break into a musical number. There are hundreds of barons, earls by the score, and lords without number. Sharkies, it's a musical.
And lords without number. But there is only one Belgarath. All men give way to him.
She beamed at him. And what about Lady Polgara?
Mandorallen blinked, and Sinedra saw that she was going too fast for him. The Lady Polgara is revered above all women, he said in puzzled response. Highness, could I but know the direction of thine inquiry, I might provide thee with more satisfactory response. She laughed.
My dear Baron, it's nothing important or serious, just curiosity, and a way to pass the time as we ride. Dernick the smith came forward at a trot just then, and his sorrel horse's hoofbeats thudding on the packed earth of the trail. Mistress Pole wants you to wait for a bit, he told them. Is anything wrong? Sinedra asked. No, it's just that there's a bush not far from the trail that she recognized. She wants to harvest the leaves. I think they have certain medicinal uses. She says it's very rare and only found in this part of Nyssa. The smith's plain, honest face was respectful as it always was when he spoke of Polgara. Sinedra had certain private suspicions about Dernick's feelings, but she kept them to herself. Oh, he went on, she said to warn you about the bush. There might be others around. It's about a foot tall and has very shiny green leaves and a little purple flower. It's deadly poisonous, even to touch. We will not stray from the trail, goodman, Mandorallen assured him, but will abide here against the lady's permission to proceed. Sharky say, sorrel horse's hoofbeats. Sounds like an album from the early 70s. You know, that's, I guess, a naming scheme I don't think about very much. 70s album names. I wouldn't put that together. Dernick nodded and rode on back down the trail. Sinedra and Mandorallen pulled their horses into the shade of a broad tree and sat waiting. Everybody ready for this? How do the Errands regard Geryon? Sinedra asked suddenly. She can't control it. She's not in full control of her mouth, I guess.
Geryon is a good lad, Mandorallen replied, somewhat confused.
But hardly noble, she prompted him.
Highness, Mandorallen told her delicately, thine education, I fear, hath led thee astray. Geryon is of the line of Belgarath and Polgara. Though he hath no rank, such as thou and I both have, his blood is the noblest in the world. I would give precedence to him without question should he ask it of me, which he would not, being a modest lad. During our sojourn at the court of King Corodulin at Vomimbre, a young countess pursued him most fervently, thinking to gain status and prestige by marriage to him.
Oh, Mandorallen hasn't forgotten that encounter. Really? Sinedra asked, with a hard little edge coming into her voice.
She sought betrothal and trapped him often with blatant invitation to dalliance and sweet conversation.
A beautiful countess?
One of the great beauties of the kingdom.
I see. Sinedra's voice was like ice.
Have I given offense, Highness?
It's not important. Mandorallen sighed again. What is it now? She snapped.
I perceive that my faults are many.
Look at this. Mandorallen is doubting himself more and more. When we first met him, he was the mightiest knight in all the land and perfect in every way, and now he has many faults. I thought you were supposed to be the perfect man. She regretted that instantly.
Nay, Highness, I am marred beyond thy conception.
A bit undiplomatic, perhaps, but that's no great flaw in an errand. Ouch.
Cowardice is, your Highness.
She laughed at the notion. Cowardice? You?
I have found that fault in myself, he admitted.
Don't be ridiculous, she scoffed. If anything, your fault lies in the other direction.
It is difficult to believe, I know, he replied. But I assure thee, with great shame, that I have felt the grip of fear upon my heart.
Sinedra was baffled by the knight's mournful confession. She was struggling to find some proper reply when a great crashing rush burst out of the undergrowth a few yards away. With a sudden start of panic, her horse wheeled and bolted. She caught only the briefest glimpse of something large and tawny leaping out of the bushes at her. Large, tawny, and with a great, gaping mouth. She tried desperately to cling to her saddle with one hand and to control her terrified horse with the other, but its frantic flight took him under a low branch, and she was swept off its back to land unceremoniously in the middle of the trail. She rolled to her hands and knees, and then froze, as she faced the beast that had so clumsily burst forth from concealment. She saw at once that the lion was not very old. She noted that, though his body was fully developed, he had only a half-grown mane. Clearly he was an adolescent, unskilled at hunting. He roared with frustration as he watched the fleeing horse disappear back down the trail, and his tail lashed. The princess felt a momentary touch of amusement. He was so young, so awkward. Then her amusement was replaced by irritation with this clumsy young beast who had caused her humiliating unhorsing. She rose to her feet, brushed off her knees, and looked at him sternly. "Shoo!" she said with an insistent flip of her hand. She was, after all, a princess, and he was only a lion, a very young and foolish lion. Yeah, there is a certain similarity in how she's thinking of this lion. The yellow eyes fell on her, then, and narrowed slightly. The lashing tail grew suddenly quite still. The young lion's eyes widened with a sort of dreadful intensity, and he crouched, his belly going low to the ground. Everyone who's played with a cat knows what this looks like. His upper lip lifted to reveal his very long, white teeth. He took one slow step toward her, his great paw touching down softly. "Don't you dare!" she told him indignantly. "Remain quite still, Highness," Mandorallen warned her in a deathly quiet voice. From the corner of her eye, she saw him slide out of his saddle. The lion's eyes flickered toward him with annoyance. Carefully, one step at a time, Mandorallen crossed the intervening space until he had placed his armored body between the lion and the princess. The lion watched him warily, not seeming to realize what he was doing until it was too late. Then, cheated of another meal, the cat's eyes went flat with rage. Mandorallen drew his sword very carefully. Then, to Sinedra's amazement, he passed it back, hilt first, to her. "So that thou shalt have means of defending thyself, should I fail to withstand him," the knight explained. Doubtfully, Sinedra took hold of the huge hilt with both hands. When Mandorallen released his grip on the blade, however, the point dropped immediately to the ground. Try though she might, Sinedra could not even lift the huge sword. Snarling, the lion crouched even lower. His tail lashed furiously for a moment, then stiffened out behind him. "Mandorallen, look out!" Sinedra screamed, still struggling with the sword. The lion leaped. Mandorallen flung his steel-cased arms wide and stepped forward to meet the cat's charge. They came together with a resounding crash, and Mandorallen locked his arms around the beast's body. The lion wrapped his huge paws around Mandorallen's shoulders, and his claws screeched deafeningly as they raked the steel of the knight's armor. His teeth grated and ground as he gnawed and bit at Mandorallen's helmeted head. Mandorallen tightened his deadly embrace. Sinedra scrambled out of the way, dragging the sword behind her, and stared wide-eyed with fright at the dreadful struggle. The lion's clawing became more desperate, and great, deep scratches appeared on Mandorallen's armor as the Mimbrate's arms tightened inexorably. The roars became yowls of pain. Sorry, everyone, that's sensitive about animals, you might want to plug your ears for a moment. And the lion struggled now, not to fight or kill, but to escape. He wriggled and thrashed and tried to bite. His hind paws came up to rake furiously on Mandorallen's armored trunk. His yowls grew more shrill, more filled with panic. With a superhuman effort, Mandorallen jerked his arms together. Sinedra heard the cracking of bones with a sickening clarity, and an enormous fountain of blood erupted from the cat's mouth. The young lion's body quivered, and his head dropped. Mandorallen unclenched his locked hands, and the dead beast slid limply from his grasp to the ground at his feet. Stunned, the princess stared at the stupendous man in blood-smeared and clawed armor standing before her. She had just witnessed the impossible. Mandorallen had killed a lion with no weapon but his mighty arms, and all for her. Without knowing why, she found herself crowing with delight. "Mandorallen!" she sang his name. "You are my knight!" Still panting from his efforts, Mandorallen pushed up his visor. His blue eyes were wide, as if her words had struck him with a stunning impact. Then he sank to his knees before her. "Your Highness," he said in a choked voice, "I pledge to thee here upon the body of this beast to be thy true knight and true and faithful knight for so long as I have breath." Deep inside her, Sinedra felt a profound sort of click, the sound of two things, fated from time's beginning to come together, finally meeting. Something, she did not know exactly what, but something very important had happened there in that sun-dappled glade. And then Barak, huge and imposing, came galloping up the trail with Hetar at his side, and the others not far behind.
"What happened?"
the big Cherek demanded, swinging down from his horse. Sinedra waited until they had all reined in to make her announcement. "The lion there attacked me," she said, trying to make it sound like an everyday occurrence. "Mandorallen killed him with his bare hands." "No, Princess, Barak's the one with the bare hands."
"I was, in fact, wearing these, Highness,"
the still kneeling knight reminded her, holding up his gauntleted fists. "It was the bravest thing I've ever seen in my life," Sinedra swept on.
"Why are you down on your knees?"
Barak asked Mandorallen.
"Are you hurt?"
"I have just made Sir Mandorallen my very own knight," Sinedra declared, "and, as is quite proper, he knelt to receive that honor from my hands." From the corner of her eye, she saw Garion in the act of sliding down from his horse. He was scowling like a thundercloud. Silently, Sinedra exulted. Leaning forward then, she placed a sisterly kiss on Mandorallen's brow. "Rise, Sir Knight," she commanded, and Mandorallen creaked to his feet. Sinedra was enormously pleased with herself. The remainder of the day passed without incident. They crossed a low range of hills and came down into a little valley as the sun settled slowly into a cloud bank off to the west. The valley was watered by a small stream, sparkling and cold, and they stopped there to set up their night's encampment. Mandorallen, in his new role as Knight Protector, was suitably attentive, and Sinedra accepted his service graciously, casting occasional covert glances at Garion, to be certain that he was noticing everything.
Ugh. Ugh.
Somewhat later, when Mandorallen had gone to see to his horse, and Geryon had stomped off to sulk, she sat demurely on a moss-covered log, congratulating herself on the day's accomplishments. "You're playing a cruel game, Princess," Dernick told her bluntly from the spot a few feet away where he was building a fire. Snedra was startled. So far as she could remember, Dernick had never spoken directly to her since she had joined the party. The smith was obviously uncomfortable in the presence of royalty, and, indeed, seemed actually to avoid her. Now, however, he looked straight into her face, and his tone was reproving. "I don't know what you're talking about," she declared.
"I think you do."
His plain, honest face was serious, and his gaze was steady. Snedra lowered her eyes and flushed slowly.
"I've seen village girls play this same game," he continued. "Nothing good ever comes of it."
"I'm not trying to hurt anybody, Dernick. There isn't really anything of that sort between Mandorallen and me. We both know that."
"Geryon doesn't."
The Sharkies, I say, who had Dernick gets judgy on their bingo card. Fair, I would say maybe justified, but fair. Snedra was amazed. "Geryon?
"Isn't that what it's all about?"
"Of course not!" she objected indignantly. Dernick's look was profoundly skeptical. "Such a thing never entered my mind," Snedra rushed on. "It's absolutely absurd."
"Really?"
Snedra's bold front collapsed. "He's so stubborn," she complained. "He just won't do anything the way he's supposed to."
"He's an honest boy. Whatever else he is or might become, he's still the plain, simple boy he was at Faldor's farm. He doesn't know the rules of the gentry. He won't lie to you or flatter you, or say things he doesn't really feel. I think something very important is going to happen to him before very long. I don't know what, but I do know it's going to take all his strength and courage. Don't weaken him with all this childishness."
"Oh, Dernick," she said with a great sigh. "What am I going to do?"
"Be honest. Say only what's in your heart. Don't say one thing and mean another. That won't work with him."
"I know. That's what makes it all so difficult. He was raised one way and I was raised another. We are never going to get along." She sighed again. Dernick smiled, a gentle, almost whimsical smile.
"It's not all that bad, Princess," he told her. "You'll fight a great deal at first. You're almost as stubborn as he is, you know. You were born in different parts of the world, but you're not really all that different inside. You'll shout at each other and shake your fingers in each other's faces, but in time that will pass, and you won't even remember what you were shouting about. Some of the best marriages I know started that way."
"Marriage?"
"That's what you've got in mind, isn't it?"
She stared at him incredulously. Then she suddenly laughed. "Dear, dear Dernick," she said, "you don't understand at all, do you?"
"I understand what I see," he replied. "And what I see is a young girl doing everything she possibly can to catch a young man."
Snedra sighed. "That's completely out of the question, you know. Even if I felt that way, which of course I don't."
"Naturally not."
He looked slightly amused. "Dear Dernick," she said again, "I can't even allow myself such thoughts. You forget who I am."
"That isn't very likely,"
he told her. Ooh, Dernick sass, that's a rare one.
"You're usually very careful to keep that fact firmly in front of everybody."
"Don't you know what it means?"
He looked a bit perplexed. "I don't quite follow."
"I'm an imperial princess, the jewel of the Empire, and I belong to the Empire. I'll have absolutely no voice in the decision about whom I'm going to marry. That decision will be made by my father and the Council of Advisors. My husband will be rich and powerful, probably much older than I am, and my marriage to him will be to the advantage of the Empire and the House of Borun. I probably won't even be consulted in the matter."
Dernick looked stunned. "That's outrageous," he objected.
"Not really," she told him. "My family has the right to protect its interests, and I'm an extremely valuable asset to the Boruns." She sighed again, a forlorn little sigh. "It might be nice, though, to be able to choose for myself, I mean. If I could, I might even look at Garyon the way you seem to think I have been looking, even though he's absolutely impossible. The way things are, though, all he can ever be is a friend."
"I didn't know,"
he apologized, his plain, practical face melancholy. "Don't take it so seriously, Dernick," she said lightly. "I've always known that this was the way things have to be." A large, glistening tear, however, welled into the corner of her eye, and Dernick awkwardly put his work-worn hand on her arm to comfort her. Without knowing why, she threw her arms around his neck, buried her face in his chest, and sobbed.
There,"
he said, clumsily patting her shaking shoulder.
There.
Well, it's 8:12, and that brings us to the end of Chapter 2, 13 pages. Chapter 3 is a bit shorter. It only goes from the bottom of page 33 to page 40. So shall I continue? Farmo says, Sinedra needs a sign that says, "I'm the jewel of House Borun, and I'm not looking at Garyon." Sharkies are up for it, okay? That conversation did put things a little in perspective with her. Right? Like, yes, she's difficult all the time. Obviously spoiled. And yes, she is very preoccupied with Garyon. And flirty and whatever. But she also truly believes that there's nothing there. There can't be anything there, right? She is the Imperial Princess. She does not have any say. Sharky says she's playing flirtatious games because it's all she thinks she's going to get. Yeah. Like, she's going to get married off to some rich old man, and she has no control over that. And that's always been her reality. All right. Chapter 3. I think we are back to Garyon finally. Finally, 2 chapters, whatever. Garyon did not sleep well that night. Although he was young and inexperienced, he was not stupid, and Princess Sinedra had been fairly obvious. Over the months since she had joined them, he had seen her attitude toward him change until they had shared a rather specialized kind of friendship. He liked her, she liked him. Everything had been fine up to that point. Why couldn't she just leave it alone? Garion surmised that it probably had something to do with the inner workings of the female mind. As soon as a friendship passed a certain point, some obscure and secret boundary, a woman quite automatically became overwhelmed by a raging compulsion to complicate things. He's a teenage boy, everyone. He doesn't have any experience with being not terrible. Sharky say so. She's supposed to be presented at the House of Riva on her 16th birthday as a bride, but expects to be married off to someone else. How long does she and the House of Riva just sit around waiting until they go home? I think there is, in the treaty, a number of days, or maybe even just she has to be presented on that day, and then she can go on with her life. Something like that. It's either like she has to wait for like 5 days or something, or it's just the one day, something like that, and then it's treaty fulfilled, you can have her back. There's no king. Continue on with your life, princess. Yeah, what Farmos is saying. It's something like that. It's either like present herself on her birthday, and then the day after she's free, well, back to her house. Or it's something like a week or something. Something that has been repeated for the past however many generations. The Sharkies. What you're describing sounds very believable to me. Well, and probably there are some people there thoroughly relishing seeing an imperial princess be kind of embarrassed in this fashion. Because people are like that. Especially when it comes to politics. He was almost certain that her transparent little game with Mandorallen had been aimed at him, and he wondered if it might not be a good idea to warn the knight, to spare him more heartbreak in the future. Sinedra's toying with the great man's affections was little more than the senseless cruelty of a spoiled child. Mandorallen must be warned. Perceptive Garion strikes? He's close to the mark, but Mandorallen must be warned. His horrendish thick-headedness might easily cause him to overlook the obvious. And yet, Mandorallen had killed the lion for her. Such stupendous bravery could quite easily have overwhelmed the flighty little princess. What if her admiration and gratitude had pushed her over the line into infatuation? That possibility, coming to Garion as it did in those darkest hours just before dawn, banished all possibility of further sleep. He arose the next morning, sandy-eyed and surly, with a terrible worry gnawing at him. As they rode out through the blue-tinged shadows of early morning, with the slanting rays of the newly risen sun gleaming on the tree-tops above them, Garion fell in beside his grandfather, seeking the comfort of the old man's companionship. It was not only that, however. Sinedra was riding demurely with Aunt Pole just ahead, and Garion felt very strongly that he should keep an eye on her. Hey Google, turn on desk lights.
Got it. Turning 4 lights on.
Even though we have just had the summer solstice, it's a bit overcast outside, so it's getting darker in here. Mr. Wolf rode in silence, looking cross and irritable, and he frequently dug his fingers under the splint on his left arm. "Leave it alone, father," Aunt Pole told him, without turning around.
"It itches."
"That's because it's healing. Just leave it alone." He grumbled about that under his breath. "Which route are you planning to take to the Vale?" she asked him.
"We'll go around by way of Toll Rain," he replied.
Sharky say, "I've been on family vacations where everyone was cranky." Aw, that's no fun. By way of Toll Rain, so they're planning on cutting through Tolnedra. "The season's moving on, father," she reminded him. "If we take too long, we'll run into bad weather in the mountains."
"I know that, Pole. Would you rather cut straight across Maragor?"
"Don't be absurd." "Is Maragor really all that dangerous?" Garion asked. Princess Senedra turned in her saddle and gave him a withering look. "Don't you know anything?" she asked him with towering superiority. Garion drew himself up, a dozen suitable responses to that coming to mind almost at once. Mr. Wolf shook his head warningly.
"Just let it pass," the old man told him. "It's much too early to start in on that just now."
Garion clenched his teeth together. Sharky say, actually, it's one of our best family stories now, years later. That's good. They rode for an hour or more through the cool morning, and Garion gradually felt his temper improving. Then Hetar rode up to speak with Mr. Wolf. "There are some riders coming," he reported.
"How many?"
Wolf asked quickly. "A dozen or more, coming in from the west."
"They could be Tolnedrans."
"I'll see," Aunt Pole murmured. She lifted her face and closed her eyes for a moment. "No," she said, "not Tolnedrans. Murgos." Hetar's eyes went flat. "Do we fight?" he asked with a dreadful kind of eagerness, his hand going to his saber.
"No,"
Wolf replied curtly.
"We hide."
"There aren't really that many of them."
"Never mind, Hetar,"
Wolf told him.
"Silk,"
He called ahead.
"there are some Murgos coming toward us from the west. Warn the others and find us all a place to hide."
Silk nodded curtly and galloped forward.
"Are there any Grolims with them?"
the old man asked Aunt Pole. "I don't think so," she answered with a small frown. "One of them has a strange mind, but he doesn't seem to be a Grolim." Silk rode back quickly. "There's a thicket off to the right," he told them. "It's big enough to hide in."
"Let's go, then,"
Wolf said. The thicket was 50 yards back among the larger trees. It appeared to be a patch of dense brush surrounding a small hollow. The ground in the hollow was marshy, and there was a spring at its center. Silk had swung down from his horse and was hacking a thick bush off close to the ground with his short sword. "Take cover in here," he told them. "I'll go back and brush out our tracks." He picked up the brush and wormed his way out of the thicket.
"Be sure the horses don't make any noise,"
Wolf told Hetar. Hetar nodded, but his eyes showed disappointment. "I was hoping you wouldn't think of that." Garion dropped to his knees and wormed his way through the thick brush until he reached the edge of the thicket. Then he sank down on the leaves covering the ground to peer out between the gnarled and stumpy trunks. gnarled and stumpy trunks. Silk, walking backward and swinging his bush, was sweeping leaves and twigs from the forest floor over the tracks they had made from the trail to the thicket. He was moving quickly, but was careful to obliterate their trail completely. From behind him, Geryon heard a faint snap and rustle in the leaves, and Sinedra crawled up and sank to the ground at his side. "You shouldn't be this close to the edge of the brush," he told her in a low voice. "Neither should you," she retorted. He let that pass. The princess had a warm, flower-like smell. For some reason, that made Geryon very nervous. "How far away do you think they are?" she whispered. "How would I know?" "You're a sorcerer, aren't you?" "I'm not that good at it." Silk finished brushing away the tracks, and stood for a moment studying the ground as he looked for any trace of their passage he might have missed. Then he burrowed his way into the thicket and crouched down a few yards from Geryon and Sinedra. "Lord Hettar wanted to fight them," Sinedra whispered to Geryon. "Hettar always wants to fight when he sees Murgoes." "Why?" "The Murgoes killed his parents when he was very young. He had to watch while they did it." She gasped. "How awful!" "If you children don't mind," Silk said sarcastically, "I'm trying to listen for horses." Somewhere beyond the trail they had just left, Geryon heard the thudding sound of horses' hooves moving at a trot. He sank down deeper into the leaves and watched, scarcely breathing. When the Murgoes appeared, there were about 15 of them, male-shirted and with the scarred cheeks of their race. Their leader, however, was a man in a patched and dirty tunic, and with coarse black hair. He was unshaven, and one of his eyes was out of line with its fellow. Geryon knew him. Silk drew in a sharp breath with an audible hiss. "Brill," he muttered. "Who's Brill?" Sinedra whispered to Geryon. "I'll tell you later," he whispered back. "Shush!" "Don't shush me!" she flared. "Not the time." A stern look from Silk silenced them. Brill was talking sharply to the Murgoes, gesturing with short, jerky movements. Then he raised his hands with his fingers wide spread and stabbed them forward to emphasize what he was saying. The Murgoes all nodded, their faces expressionless, and spread out along the trail, facing the woods and the thicket where Geryon and the others were hiding. Brill moved farther up the trail.
"Keep your eyes open," he shouted to them. "Let's go."
I have no idea what Brill sounded like. It's been so long since he's had any dialogue. The Murgoes started to move forward at a walk, their eyes searching. 2 of them rode past the thicket so close that Geryon could smell the sweat on their horses' flanks.
"I'm getting tired of that man,"
one of them remarked to the other.
"I wouldn't let it show,"
the second one advised.
"I can take orders as well as any man,"
the first one said.
"But that one's beginning to irritate me. I think he would look better with a knife between his shoulder blades."
"I don't think he'd like that much, and it might be a little hard to manage."
"I could wait until he was asleep."
"I've never seen him sleep."
"Everybody sleeps, sooner or later."
"It's up to you,"
the second replied with a shrug.
"But I wouldn't try anything rash, unless you've given up the idea of ever seeing Rakhaga again."
The 2 of them moved on out of earshot. So we've learned 2 things about Brill here that we had not really caught before, because before he was always kind of portrayed I don't know, kind of like a thug. But here we've heard both that one, he has a strange mind from Polgara, and two, that this particular Murgo has never seen him sleep, anyways. Also, three, that the Murgos don't particularly like him. At least the ones he's working with right now. It's interesting. It's new. The two of them moved on out of earshot. Silk crouched, gnawing nervously at a fingernail. His eyes had narrowed to slits, and his sharp little face was intent. Then he began to swear under his breath. Sharky's mentioned he also must have some sort of authority, yeah. And Pharma says, "Don't bite your nails, Silk." "What's wrong, Silk?" Garion whispered to him. "I've made a mistake," Silk answered irritably. "Let's go back to the others." He turned and crawled through the bushes, toward the spring at the center of the thicket. Mr. Wolf was seated on a log, scratching absently at his splinted arm.
Well?
He asked, looking up. 15 Murgos, Silk replied shortly, and an old friend. It was Brill, Garion reported. He seemed to be in charge.
Brill?
The old man's eyes widened with surprise. He was giving orders and the Murgos were following them, Silk said. They didn't like it much, but they were doing what he told them to do. They seemed to be afraid of him. I think Brill's something more than an ordinary hireling. What we were just saying. Where's Rak Haga? Sinedra asked. Wolf looked at her sharply. We heard two of them talking, she explained. They said they were from Rak Haga. I thought I knew the names of all the cities in Cthul Murgos, but I've never heard of that one.
You're sure they said Rak Haga?
Wolf asked her, his eyes intent. I heard them too, Garion told him. That was the name they used, Rak Haga. Mr. Wolf stood up, his face suddenly grim.
We're going to have to hurry then. Tar Urgas is preparing for war. How do you know that?
Barak asked him.
Rak Haga is 1,000 leagues south of Rak Goska, and the southern Murgos are never brought up into this part of the world unless the Murgo king is on the verge of going to war with someone. Let them come,
Barak said with a bleak smile.
If it's all the same to you, I'd like to get our business attended to first. I've got to go to Rak Cthul, and I'd prefer not to have to wade through whole armies of Murgos to get there.
The old man shook his head angrily.
What is Tar Urgas thinking of?
He burst out.
It's not time yet.
Barak shrugged.
One time's as good as another. Not for this war. Too many things have to happen first. Can't Ktuchik keep a leash on that maniac?
Unpredictability is part of Tar Urgas's unique charm, Silk observed sardonically. He doesn't know himself what he's going to do from one day to the next. Knowest thou the king of the Murgos? Mandorallen inquired. We've met, Silk replied. We're not fond of each other.
Brill and his Murgos should be gone by now,
Mr. Wolf said. Did he say that it was Grim? I think I glossed over a Grim. Where is that line? Oh, yeah. Mr. Wolf stood up, his face suddenly barred. I passed by a grim without noticing it. Good catch, Sharkies.
Brill and his Murgos should be gone by now,
Mr. Wolf said.
Let's move on. We've got a long way to go, and time's starting to catch up with us.
Mr. Wolf is talking about time. He moved quickly toward his horse. Shortly before sundown, they went through a high pass lying in a notch between two mountains, and stopped for the night in a little glen a few miles down on the far side. Does Ricky say, interesting that Pole says Brill has a strange mind? Why does she notice now? Had she never inspected before, or has his mind changed? I think she's never actually felt it before, because she doesn't passively scan people's minds at all times. She does it with intent, right? Hetar pointed out that riders were approaching, and then she went and kind of searched to see if they were Tolnadrins, right? So I don't think she has ever done that with him around before. And, it's probably a little like she was specifically trying to figure out what type of people were approaching. So she was looking at what their minds looked like, right? So I think that's what led to it. That said, I feel like there was one other example where Brill went galloping past. But maybe she didn't have the leisure to really, that might have been a little more frantic or something. Maybe that's why. Or maybe it's a plot hole. Sharky says, finally, Mr. Wolf talks about the time. Yeah. All right.
Keep the fire down as much as you can, Dernick,
Mr. Wolf warned the smith.
Southern Murgos have sharp eyes, and they can see the light from a fire from miles away. I'd rather not have company in the middle of the night.
Dernick nodded soberly, and dug his fire pit somewhat deeper than usual. Mandorallen was attentive to the Princess Sinedra as they set up for the night, and Garion watched sourly. Though he had violently objected each time Aunt Pole had insisted that he serve as Sinedra's personal attendant, now that the tiny girl had her knight to fetch and carry for her, Garion felt somehow that his rightful position had in some way been usurped.
We're going to have to pick up our pace,
Wolf told them after they had finished a meal of bacon, bread, and cheese. Ham.
We've got to get through the mountains before the first storms hit, and we're going to have to try to stay ahead of Brill and his Murgos.
He scraped a space clear on the ground in front of him with one foot, picked up a stick, and began sketching a map in the dirt.
We're here,
he pointed.
Maragor's directly ahead of us. We'll circle to the west, go through Tol Rain, and then strike northeast toward the Vale.
Might it not be shorter to cross Maragor? Mandorallen suggested, pointing at the crude map.
Perhaps,
the old man replied.
But we won't do that unless we have to. Maragor's haunted, and it's best to avoid it if possible.
We are not children to be frightened of insubstantial shades, Mandorallen declared somewhat stiffly. No one's doubting your courage, Mandorallen, Aunt Pole told him. But the spirit of Mara wails in Maragor. It's better not to offend him. Mara is a him. Are all the gods male? Off the top of my head, I can't think of a female god from this book. I guess, I don't know. Gender is probably somewhat irrelevant to gods, but yeah, they have kind of, Pharmos has always assumed Mara was female. They talk about the population of Maragor being predominantly female, I believe, but oh, we've got some Ghostbusters in the chat. Dude. Pharmos and I actually just watched that. Ghostbusters 1. Because the new Ghostbusters is on Amazon Prime, and so we thought we would rewatch the original 2 before watching that one for the first time, because we haven't seen it yet. Anyways, finish up this chapter. How far is it to the Vale of Aldor? Dernick asked.
250 leagues, Wolf answered. We'll be a month or more in the mountains, even under the best conditions. Now we'd better all get some sleep. Tomorrow is likely to be a hard day.
That's the end of the chapter. We finished chapters 2 and 3, which brings us to page 41, at 8:41 my time. Yeah. I can't actually think of all of the gods of this world. So there's a possibility, but I'm thinking that maybe all of them might be male. Oh, right. Nadra. Nadra is, of course, the Tolnadrin's god. By the way, don't go looking up lists of the gods, I would suggest. But yeah. I think they are all referred to as male. You had just done that. I would suggest aborting that endeavor, just in case. Okay. Well, mostly just travel so far. Travel and conversation. But we did have a lion attack. That, I have trouble thinking of wild lions, and I can't help but feel like that lion is a little out of place. Geographically speaking, I mean, this is a different world. So, whatever. It could be anywhere. Also, I guess it's a little strange that it is just a lion. A lion in a fantasy world feels a little odd to me. I don't know why. Like, horses, fine, people, normal, right? Snakes, alright, sure. But for some reason a lion feels out of place. I wonder if that's just my own personal bias. And then, I don't know, don't lions live in plains? Do lions live in jungles? Leopards or, panthers live in jungles, but I thought lions were more plains dwelling. Mountain lions have lion in their name, but this was not a mountain lion. This was a lion with a mane. This was your typical lion, not a mountain lion. They are not the same. Yeah, that bit with the lion, I don't know. It's always felt a little strange to me. Not bad necessarily, but also like it's such a violent fight, right? Blood jetting out of its mouth, like that is bit brutal. Not to mention, Mandorallen really not thinking, I'll disarm myself so that you can protect yourself in case I fail. Like, that's very noble, but come on. You'd be better off using the sword yourself. Sharky says, because of Sinedra's description of the lion and it being somewhat out of place, Mr. did almost assume it could be Garion. Oh, I see. Huh. But then again, Belgarath and Polgara can speak in their animal forms, can they? I don't know that we've ever actually established that. We've seen in the present their animal forms once, and they changed out of them before speaking. Polgara was back in her, human form, sitting in a tree when she said, "Help me down." And then other than that, we've pretty much only heard about Belgarath being in his wolf form through sort of the prologue history text bits. So I don't know that we've actually seen a speaking animal yet, not counting Hetar's psychic communication with horses. At least nothing that I remember. Am I remembering that wrong? Has there been something like that? Maybe you're just not remembering. Could have been telepathy. What have they done in their animal forms? We had them, Garion went out at night because he couldn't sleep, and he saw a wolf and an owl in sort of the mists, and then he there was a shimmer or something, or the mist moved in the way, and then there was Belgarath and Aunt Pole, and then they spoke to each other. But I don't remember other than that. I think that's the only time we've actually seen them in animal forms. Not counting, again, historical bits. And those are, questionable accuracy and also don't usually have a lot of... Well, they do have dialogue in them, but I don't remember any bits with dialogue with Belgarath at all. And I don't think Polgara's really been in them much. I guess she sort of was when we were talking about how her sister went off to join the House of Riva. But even then it was kind of tangential. Anyways, yeah, that would have been interesting. Suddenly, Garion is sneaking around as a lion and attacking Sinedra's horse. It seems risky. But yeah, I guess I could see how that could happen. But then the lion gets, killed horribly. So, and then Garion comes up and sees what happened. So luckily, no, not Garion. Not Garion attacking Mandorallen and then getting killed. It is interesting. The fight doesn't necessarily... There are more awkward ways to flirt. Not many, but some. The fight between Mandorallen and the lion doesn't necessarily sound that dangerous, but again, we're in a fantasy world here, so maybe it's you don't think about it. A lion is dangerous, right? You would not survive fighting a lion unarmed. Not a wild lion. I wouldn't survive fighting a lion even if I had a spear or something, I'm sure. So. Oh, got a new follower. Kelwind or Chelwind or Selwind. Well. Oh. And then we got a spam bot. If somebody could write as I'm saying. We got an unrelated spam bot. I got it. Unless somebody else did. No, I got it. It did sound dangerous. You back away from raccoons in your yard. Sorry, farmhouse. I beat you to it. Yeah. Raccoons are cute, but you don't want to tangle with them. Farmo saw a huge raccoon this morning, and luckily Binibik did not engage beyond barking from our deck. He borked at it. It did not seem to care. Raccoons are very cute. When they're not, rabid and angry. They're one of those animals where it's like, it would be very fun, I feel like, to have a tame pet raccoon. In the same vein as it would be fun to have a pet fox. Something like that. Not something I ever plan on looking into because realistically they belong in the wild. And if they, are in rehabilitation or something like that, then they should probably be with someone who is trained for that type of thing. And they probably would take a lot of care, but they do seem very cute. Also, skunks that have their scent glands removed. They're very cute. Stomping along. Doing big stomps when they're excited. You say Garion probably wouldn't attack a horse unless he found his animal instincts hard to control. Yeah. No, he would not be able to face Hatar after doing something like that. Both of them are mostly nocturnal, which is not the most ideal for pets. Yeah, that's true. There was a period of time when I was like, oh, I want a pet fennec fox. It'd be so cool to have a pet fennec fox. But then, I read up on it and could not provide the type of care that one would require. And I didn't even have that much housing space at the time either, so. Says skunks have a very cute little trundle, yeah, the way they... Alright, well, it's almost 9 o'clock, so I'm going to call things there. But we are getting into it. Getting into into Magician's Gambit. I did it, that's the trundle. Yeah. So, yeah. See everybody on Friday, I hope. Yeah. Got a family graduation to attend in the morning. And we're going to continue our packing and moving and whatever of the house between now and then, but be back here on Friday. More reading. Alright, well. Have a good rest of the week, everybody. See y'all then. Good night. And thanks.